Thank you very much.
Help us understand.
Thank you very much, Olive. And I'm very happy you've asked the question. I also really want to thank you that you've provided us the opportunity to unpack that, which is an area that I'm very passionate about. Because my frustration over time is that us in the scientific world, as climate scientists, there's quite a lot that we know that we've not been able to break down for people. And climate change being an existential crisis, because that's what I call it. Listening to the panelists and how multifaceted, intersectional it is to every area of life. It's an existential crisis, because when you start getting stillbirths, when you start getting nutrition, when you start mortality, when you start socioeconomic livelihoods going away, it's basically an existential crisis for me. And if we do not unpack the science for people to act, then we are not doing society justice. So just to break it down, and in very simplistic way, I always try to really break down the science to the level that we can understand in the village. I'll start by explaining what greenhouse gases are, what global warming is, and climate change is in very simplistic terms. What has happened over time is that when the industrialized countries were developing, they required a source of energy to drive their development. Most of them tapped on energy sources that are called dirty, which include coal and others. A lot of activity also that has happened in the industrialization space, in the industrialization period, were driving their energy from dirty sources. What happened is, because of this, they deposited dirty gases to the atmosphere. Now, if you think about your biology, we used to talk about carbon dioxide oxygen balance. Trees were helping us to take in carbon dioxide and give us oxygen. Now, what we did in that industrialization period is that we destabilized that balance, because these dirty gases, the leading is carbon dioxide, the other one is methane, and others that I do not want to mention because they would sound very complex. But just know that there are these dirty gases that we deposited in the atmosphere. These are what you hear us in the scientific world called greenhouse gases. And I'm so happy that Jennifer has actually gotten the concept as a rural woman. The reason why they are called greenhouse gases is that it has an effect like that which a greenhouse, the one that we plant our tomatoes and vegetables in the village, has. Because when you walk into a greenhouse, on a hot day, the outside would be hot, but the inside of the greenhouse would be hotter. Why? Because the technology that is used in building the greenhouse is such that it allows radiation to go in, but it does not allow it to go back. That's how that warming effect comes in a greenhouse that we use in our villages. And it's in the same way that we now christened these dirty gases in the atmosphere to be called greenhouse gases. Why? Because they now formed a layer, and I'd really like to be as simplistic as possible. It formed a layer, a kind of blanket in our atmosphere that allows solar radiation from the sun to penetrate to the earth. But what it also does, just like a normal greenhouse, it does not allow the solar radiation to do what? To go back. And that is now what has caused a global situation of temperature rise, which we call global warming. So I hope at least I've been able to break down greenhouse gases and global warming. Now, global warming is now the one that is responsible for climate change. Because there's this increase in temperatures. If you look at the current temperatures and the pre-industrial levels, you have up to 2 degrees Celsius increase. When we say 2, Olive, it sounds very little. But even a 0.05 degrees Celsius change in temperature is enough to cause catastrophic effects like stillbirths. Because God had created the world in such a way that there was a balance. In fact, Olive, next time I think we'll begin by reading the Bible, because God had really created such a beautiful balance of the environment. He knew that at this particular temperature, women would be able to bring their children to term. They'll be able to deliver safely. The pests and diseases that the planet would experience would be those that are manageable. Because the thing about even a 0.05 degrees Celsius increase is that we are starting to experience pests and diseases that scientists have no idea what they will do about. So that increase in temperature of about 2 degrees Celsius over time is now the one that is responsible for all this mess. And now climate change. And the effects of climate change, we have discussed them here, but probably just to list them so that we contextualize them. The biggest effect has been in the hydrological cycle. the water cycle. Forget about the big scientific terms, the water cycle. Because how God had created the planet again was that he had given us a reservoir of water called ice and glaciers in the Arctic zones. And what God had enabled us to experience and to happen is that this water would melt, this ice would melt at slow rates. When it melts at slow rates, it recharges the groundwater, it goes to the seas and the oceans, because it was happening at a slow, you know, steady and sustainable way. What these 2 degrees Celsius did, Olive, was that all of a sudden, most of the ice and the glaciers in the Arctic areas are now melting. What does that mean? There's much more water on the surface of the earth, in the ocean and the seas. And what is now happening? The ocean level is rising. The countries, like Jennifer was talking about, some women that we met in Egypt in the conference, they would tell you that I have lost my home. Because for small island countries, the ocean increase, the sea level rise, has actually taken away their landmass, their houses and everything. And we have areas like the Maldives, the Bahamas. When you look at the IPCC report, they are going to disappear in the next, by 2030 because of ocean increase.